happy birthday. Yes, that actually happened at the White House today. We will get there, I promise, eventually. But first, something real. After the 2010 midterm elections, after last year's elections, a group called the Center for Responsive Politics took a look at who spent the most money in that election. They concluded that the corporate-funded side of Republican Party politics absolutely devastated Democrats and Democratic causes across the country. Outside groups on the right outspent the left by so much in the last elections that it wasn't even quantitative anymore. They qualitatively changed the nature of the competition in that election. The Center for Responsive Politics summed it up this way. They said, quote, "The Democrats brought a bat and the Republicans brought a grenade." Here's the difference between conservatives and liberals. Here's the difference between Democrats and Republicans. When somebody says that sort of thing about Republicans, about them bringing a grenade, Republicans put it on their homepage because they're proud of it. This is the front page of Karl Rove's unlimited spending campaign group, American Crossroads and Crossroads GPS. They brag about the grenade thing on their front page. That's what they're advertising that they do. We can report tonight that Mr. Rove's groups may be about to bring that exact same grenade that they brought to the last election to what they see as the next big fight, a fight that we have been highlighting on this show for the past few nights. The organic, grassroots, vocal anger being expressed by regular American citizens to the Republicans who voted for the Paul Ryan Republican budget. The disapproval and the rage at Republican members of Congress for voting to kill Medicare, for voting to roll back tax rates for the rich to what they were in the 1930s.
Not one senior citizen is harmed by this budget.
What?
You're a liar!
Everyone under 55 is screwed!
Do you know anything about Medicare?
Well, I'm not on it, no.
That's what I'm driving at.
You asked if I voted to abolish Medicare, but I did not.
Well, you did vote to abolish Medicare. That's what his vote is.
As we have noted on this show, there has been a minor Republican Party freakout over all of this. House Republicans held their own conference call yesterday to try to do some damage control about how to better message their votes for the Paul Ryan Republican budget. A congressional aide telling Reuters today, quote, "Some members are feeling the heat." But post Citizens United, if you're talking about how politics really happens, frankly, the parties can almost be irrelevant. The Republican Party can hold as many conference calls for its members as they want. It's the corporate side of Republican politics that will be fighting this fight for them in big dollar amounts. And the corporate side of Republican politics is mounting a counter-offensive on this that is pretty breathtaking in scope. On one side of this fight, again, are folks like this random veteran in Florida who's expressing his anger about the Republican plan to kill Medicare and cut VA benefits in favor of tax cuts for the rich and for corporations. That gentleman showed up yesterday at a town hall event held by Republican Congressman Daniel Webster of Florida. We played his remarks on last night's show, so we'll use him as a means of understanding that one side, right? That's one side of this. Here's what's on the other side.
Something unusual happened last week in Washington, D.C., of all places. Elected officials actually did what they said they would. The House passed a budget that protects and preserves Medicare for years to come. And our Congressman, Daniel Webster, voted to protect Medicare and keep it secure for future retirees. Paid for by the 60 Plus Association.
Paid for by the 60 Plus Association. Paid for by the 60 Plus Association. That sounds like in real time. According to 60 Plus, they say the Republican plan, the Paul Ryan plan, protects and preserves Medicare by dismantling it, of course. This 60 Plus group that's running these radio ads, they're also running robocalls and they're sending out mailers in 39 House districts right now, all about how when Republicans voted to kill Medicare, they were really voting to protect it. When they acted to kill, what they meant was to cuddle. 60 Plus is shelling out somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 on this campaign. Who is funding that? We do not know. 60 Plus does not disclose who funds them. In terms of what interests they advocated for in the past, though, back in the 2000s, this 60 Plus group lobbied against allowing states to re-import prescription drugs from Canada so they would be cheaper. Remember that fight? How does it even make sense that a seniors advocacy group would not want cheaper drugs for seniors? Why would they lobby in that direction? Virtually all of their largest contributors at that time came from the same source, the nation's pharmaceutical industry. Now that same group, 60 Plus, says the Paul Ryan plan to privatize and thereby kill Medicare would actually be great for Medicare. Also part of the counteroffensive on the right is the group Americans for Prosperity. AFP is running pro-Paul Ryan Republican budget radio ads, web ads, and robocalls in more than 20 districts across the country right now. Total ad buy, about $400,000. Who's paying for that? Again, don't know. Americans for Prosperity does not disclose its donors. We have asked them many, many, many times. Trust me. What we do know about them, though, is that they are funded, at least in part, by corporate funds. Here's what the president of Americans for Prosperity, Tim Phillips, told us on the show back in 2009.
We would love to have more corporate funding, so if there's more corporations watching tonight, feel free to give to us.
Americans for Prosperity was founded by the 18th richest man in the world, one of the Koch brothers. And Americans for Prosperity is now stepping in to defend the Paul Ryan budget, which, of course, slashes taxes for corporations and for the wealthiest people in the country. Then there's Karl Rove's groups, American Crossroads and Crossroads GPS. They tell us tonight that they have not unleashed yet their proverbial grenade on this fight. But they told us, quote, that could change. The group's spokesman telling us, quote, there's been an increased level of donor activity since President Obama's budget speech 2 weeks ago. Donor interest has peaked. When asked what sort of resources could be brought to bear on their side of this fight, Mr. Rove's group reminded us of the $750,000 ad buy the group placed last month going after union rights. Who pays for that sort of thing when Crossroads and Crossroads GPS does stuff? Well, at one point last year, 91% of the funding for American Crossroads came from just a few people, just a handful of billionaires. Crossroads GPS, however, does not have to disclose to the public who funds them at all. In addition to all of that big money coming from the right on this issue, there are other conservative groups like FreedomWorks, like the Heritage Action for America, part of the Heritage Foundation, I think. Also the American Action Network, who are joining in this big conservative, apparently corporate-funded counteroffensive. They're doing things right now like distributing pro-Paul Ryan budget talking points. That last group, the American Action Network, that's run by a who's who of current and former Wall Street executives. And, you know, they just might benefit a little bit from Paul Ryan's tax-cutting budget. That budget also happens to dismantle some key parts of President Obama's Wall Street reform law. That's what we can figure so far about who's behind the conservative counteroffensive to stop the ringing denunciations of the Paul Ryan Republican budget that is lighting up town halls across the country right now. What's going on at these town hall events was not organized by anyone. The Democratic Party is following its own base here. After people turned up on their own and started doing this at town halls, then the machinery of the Democratic Party and liberal groups started scrambling to try to catch up and reinforce what was happening. But take a look at their efforts on the left compared to the corporate-backed efforts happening on the right. Right now, the Democrats' House Campaign Committee, the DCCC, is running radio ads, web ads, and robocalls attacking the Paul Ryan budget. They're running them in 25 separate swing districts. Total ad buy, $6,000. That's not a typo. A Democratic group called the House Majority PAC is now running radio ads in 10 districts. Their total ad buy is $100,000. And that's about it that we know of. Look at how the two sides stack up against each other, right? I mean, here's the money on the right. $800,000 from 60 Plus, $400,000 from Americans for Prosperity, whatever Karl Rove's billionaire groups lob into the mix. And their last big buy, remember, was $750,000. Who knows what else from these very well-funded other conservative groups who've now said that they're going to get in on this. That's what we've got on the right. Compare that to, bink, $106,000 on the left. It does appear that liberal groups are going to try to raise money to compete here. Groups like Americans United for Change and Protect Your Care is one group. Move On. These groups are already doing some early organizing, but look at what they're trying to compete with. There is real political potency to what is going on here, to the national reaction to what the Republicans in the House just voted for. If what the Republicans have to run on this year and next year is a plan that defines their party, a plan to kill Medicare, a budget that is a Rotten Tomato target, even in red districts all across the country, For Republican electoral chances, that just won't do. And you can tell that the right thinks that just won't do because their really, really, really big money is now pouring in to stop it. Joining us now is Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He joins us here in studio tonight. Senator Sanders, it's nice to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
Do you think that this is sort of the way things are from here on out now? Every time grassroots momentum of any side grows on the left, it is met by corporate anonymous donor stuff on the right?
The answer is, of course. And what you're seeing, I have to tell you, is nickels and dimes in terms of what we can expect coming down the pike as we get closer to the election. As a result of Citizens United, what can now happen is that billionaires and corporations can provide hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into campaigns, radio ads, television ads, and as you've just indicated, they do it in secret. What the Ryan budget is about is the most radical right-wing extremist budget ever passed in the history of the United States Congress. This would transform America by giving $1 trillion more in tax breaks to the richest people in this country who are already doing phenomenally well, while in the middle of recession, when working people, low-income people, middle-class people are hurting, it will decimate program after program after program, as you've just indicated, convert Medicare into a voucher program, which means that low and moderate income seniors somehow or another are going to have to come up with money they don't have when they get sick and end up in the hospital. It is a total disaster. And I think what you're looking at is an election which will be based on the Ryan budget. I just learned today that Harry Reid, the majority leader in the Senate, plans to bring the Ryan budget right to the floor of the Senate. Let the Republicans vote for it. I think that's good strategy. But that is what the fight is. It's a vision of America, which I think most Americans do not want to see.
I feel like it has been interesting to see this happen at constituent town hall meetings for Republican members of Congress. That means that people who live in districts that elected a Republican member of Congress have these feelings about this Paul Ryan budget. It is not necessarily the Democratic base who we are seeing here, and it certainly doesn't seem to be an organized effort. This seems to be sort of an organic thing. Given that, is the Democratic Party able to organize on the basis of this, in a sense, to not necessarily make more of it happen than would otherwise happen, but to turn this into a sustained, electorally rewarding effort?
Well, I certainly hope so. I want to tell you something. Polls that I have seen suggest that working class people in the Tea Party do not think it's a good idea to decimate Medicare and Medicaid or Pell Grants. So I think that the Democrats now have an opportunity to bring forward a very different vision of America than the Ryan Republican budget. And your point is this going to be a sustained activity? That Reid is planning to bring that bill to the floor of the Senate to give our Republican colleagues the chance to vote it up or down, vote for it or against it, I think is the first step. But I think this is what the campaign is about. Do you give tax breaks to billionaires and decimate the programs that millions of Americans depend upon? And then in addition to that, it is clear our Republican friends want to destroy Social Security as well. So I cannot recall a moment in American history where the choices are clearer. I think the vast majority of the American people, including many Republicans, do not support the basic concepts of the Republican budget. I
know that I think you held 2 town hall events in Vermont yesterday.
Yes.
You have another one up there tomorrow. What are you hearing from, your constituency is the entire state, and Vermont is a more diverse state. I live near Vermont. It's a more diverse state than people give it credit for. What are you hearing from your constituents on this?
Rachel, we had a meeting. We focused on children's issues and family issues. And I'll tell you, if your TV camera was there would have been people in tears to hearing what single moms and what families are struggling with right now. And they're saying, look, if they cut Head Start, how do I go to work? I have a job right now. How do I go to work if I don't have decent child care or Head Start? People right now are struggling with health care. If they cut Medicaid, what am I supposed to do? I have some chronic health problem. I don't have a lot of money. How do I get to the doctor if they decimate health care? People are talking about how their kids are not going to be able to go to college if Pell Grants are cut substantially. So what you're seeing is people just hanging on right now. And if the Republicans cut these programs to give tax breaks to millionaires, there will be enormous suffering. I was in Morrisville, Vermont last night. A woman, she raised her hand. She asked a very simple question. She said, what do they think is going to happen to people when they do all of these things? What is going to happen to people? And I'll tell you what will happen to people. People will die. We lose 45,000 people a year now who don't get to a doctor when they should. 45,000. What do you think is going to happen if millions of people are thrown off of Medicaid? If you are a senior citizen in 10 years when their plan kicks in, let's say you're making $20,000 a year and you have a cancer. What are you going to do with an $8,000 voucher? What do you think you're going to do? How long is that going to last in the hospital? What happens to you? So I think what you're seeing now is an assault, an unprecedented assault on the part of big money, using their Republican friends to remake America in a way that the vast majority of the people in our country do not want to see.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, it's a real pleasure to have you here in person. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
That was the political news today that affects real people, real policy. Then there was that other thing, the birth certificate thing, which has nothing to do with policy. It has to do with political opportunism and a bunch of people making lots and lots and lots of money. It's a racket, it turns out. We will explain next.